Imagine this. You're sitting at home, ready for what should be a simple community meeting. You grab your laptop, click the Zoom link, and wait to join. It's your neighborhood's annual HOA meeting. Nothing too exciting, but important. Nonetheless, there are decisions to be made, updates to be shared, and everyone wants their voice heard. But instead of diving straight into the meeting, you wait, and wait, and wait some more. Why? Because before the meeting can even begin, every single member has to be verified one by one. Now, let me rewind a little bit. This story comes from a suburban community of just under 300 single-family homes. It's a neighborhood without a clubhouse, which means that for convenience, and let's be honest, to save money, the HOA board decided to host meetings virtually. Zoom became the go-to platform, mostly because that's what the property management company was already comfortable using. Sounds reasonable, right? Virtual meetings save people the hassle of driving. They allow more people to attend from the comfort of their homes, and in theory, they should make the process smoother. But here's the catch. The very thing that was supposed to make life easier ended up becoming a huge source of frustration. Picture this: last year, about 50 members showed up online for the big annual meeting. A great turnout for an But here's where the nightmare begins. Verifying all of them now. For those who aren't familiar with HOA meetings, verification means making sure that the people joining are actually homeowners in the community, not random outsiders, tenants, or family members who aren't officially allowed to vote. It sounds simple enough, but with Zoom, the process turned into a slow-motion disaster. Each person had to be checked, confirmed, and logged in properly before the meeting could even start. In that process, it dragged on for over 20 minutes. 20 minutes of dead air, 20 minutes of frustration, 20 minutes of members growing restless, staring at their screens, wondering why things weren't moving along. And honestly, who could blame them? You show up on time, expecting the meeting to start at 7 p.m. sharp, and by 7:20 you're still stuck in a digital waiting room while the board scrambles to play detective. It's no surprise that people got impatient. Some even got annoyed. And that kind of tension doesn't set the right tone for a community meeting where cooperation and understanding are supposed to be at the center. Now, let's pause here and think about this situation. On the surface, it's just a scheduling hiccup, but underneath, it highlights a much bigger problem. When the system isn't working, the community feels it. People lose trust. They feel like their time isn't valued. And when you're dealing with an HOA where emotions already run high over rules, fees, and neighborhood politics, the last thing you want is to start your annual meeting with 50 irritated homeowners. The board knew this couldn't go on. Something had to change. But what? And that brings us to today's story, the search for a better solution. This isn't just about technology, it's about community. It's about finding a way to balance security, fairness, and efficiency. In a world where everything is moving online, it's about making sure that when people take the time to participate in their neighborhood, they don't feel like they're being punished for showing up. So, as we dive deeper into this story, keep one question in mind. If you were on this board, how would you fix it? Would you stick with Zoom and try to tweak the process? Would you invest in a new system designed for HOAs? Or would you push for something entirely different, like requiring pre-registration? Because as you'll see, the board is caught between two worlds. What's convenient for management and what's fair and efficient for the community. And the gap between the two is where all the frustration lives. This, right here, is where our story begins. So, now that we've set the stage, let's dig into the heart of the problem. The board thought virtual meetings would be the perfect solution. For their HOA, no driving across town. No trying to find parking near a clubhouse that didn't even exist. No renting out extra space. Just a simple Zoom link. A click of a button, and everyone's in. Easy, right? Well, not exactly. Here's where the cracks began to show. The HOA has nearly 300 homes in its community. At the annual meeting, only about 50 members actually attended, which is already a big crowd for an HOA. But here's the kicker. Before the meeting could even begin, each person had to be verified. Now, you might be wondering, what does verification even mean? Why can't people just join the call and get started? That's a good question, and the answer lies in the rules of the HOA itself. For a meeting to be legitimate, only homeowners, the actual members, are allowed to participate officially. Not tenants, not friends, not family members, just the people whose names are tied to the property. This is crucial because when it comes to voting on budgets, electing board members, or approving policies, the stakes are high. You can't just let anyone walk in and start influencing decisions. So, on paper, the verification process makes sense, but in practice, it was a nightmare. Imagine 50 people trying to log in to a Zoom call all at once. The host and the management company had to cross-check every single person. What's your name? What's your address? Are you the owner or a co-owner? Let me look you up on the list. Multiply that by 50, and suddenly, you've got a 20-minute bottleneck before the meeting can even start. And while 20 minutes might not sound like much, in the context of a live meeting, it feels like an eternity. For the people waiting, every second drags. They sit in silence, staring at blank screens or muted microphones, wondering why they bothered logging in on time. The frustration starts to build. Members begin asking in the chat, "Why is this taking so long?" Someone else might crack a joke. At this rate, the meeting will be over before it even starts, and slowly, the atmosphere of cooperation turns sour. By the time the meeting finally kicks off, half the attendees are already annoyed. Some have lost patience, others are distracted or disengaged. And instead of focusing on the issues that matter, budgets, maintenance, neighborhood projects, the board is left trying to win back the goodwill they lost before they even started. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a deeper problem. First, there's the trust issue. Homeowners want to feel like their time is respected. When they log in at the agreed-upon time, they expect things to run smoothly. If the process is disorganized, it sends a message, intentional or not, that the board isn't prepared. Or worse, that they don't value the community's time. Second, there's the participation issue. If attending a meeting feels like a hassle, fewer people will show up in the future. And that's a huge problem for an HOA, because participation is the lifeblood of any community. The fewer voices you hear, the less representative the decisions become. And third, there's the legal issue. Delays and confusion in verification raise questions about whether the meeting was run properly. Did everyone verified actually belong there? Did someone slip through who shouldn't have been allowed? Could a disgruntled member later challenge the validity of the meeting? These are real risks. From the outside, this might all sound like a small technical hiccup, but inside the community, it's a serious source of tension. Remember, HOAs are already notorious for disagreements. Homeowners argue over landscaping rules, parking assessments, even the color of someone's front door. Adding technical chaos on top of that, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire. And here's the part that stings the most. This isn't a one-time problem. This is annual. Every year, the board knows they're going to face the same bottleneck, the same wasted time, the same impatient homeowners tapping their fingers on their keyboards. The board members themselves aren't immune to the frustration either. They're volunteers, neighbors just like everyone else. They don't want to spend their evenings wrangling Zoom participants and double-checking addresses. They want to run a meeting that feels professional, efficient, and fair. Instead, they find themselves playing the role of tech support agents and gatekeepers, while the actual business of the community takes a back seat. And that's when the realization hit. This isn't just about Zoom, it's about process, it's about design. It's about finding a system that can balance the need for security and verification with the need for efficiency and convenience. Because as long as verification takes 20 minutes, the meeting will always start on the wrong foot. And no amount of good intentions can erase the frustration that builds during that dead time. This is the crux of the problem. The HOA board can't continue like this, but they also can't abandon verification altogether. So, what do? That's the million-dollar question, and as we'll see in the next part of the story, the board started brainstorming. They knew there had to be a better way. After the frustration of last year's annual meeting, the board found itself in a difficult spot. They had seen the tension firsthand, the impatient members, the wasted time, the awkward silence before the meeting even started. They knew this wasn't just a minor inconvenience anymore. It was a real issue threatening the efficiency of their community governance. Now, remember, an HOA board isn't made up of corporate executives with endless resources. These are volunteers, neighbors, homeowners, regular people who agreed to serve because they care about the community. They juggle their own jobs, families, and personal lives, all while trying to keep the neighborhood running smoothly. But after that disastrous 20-minute delay, they couldn't ignore the problem any longer. During their internal discussions, the board quickly realized that the biggest risk wasn't just wasted time. It was losing the trust of the community. Think about it. When residents agree to attend a meeting, they're giving up their evening. Some people skip dinner, some rush home from work, some put kids to bed early just so they can join the call. If they're greeted by a clunky verification process that feels unorganized, it sends the wrong message. It makes the board look unprepared. And in an HOA, perception matters almost as much as reality. The board members worried. What if people stop attending altogether? What if they think we don't respect their time? What if this frustration spills over into how they vote on issues? Or worse, how they view the board itself? It wasn't paranoia, it was a valid concern. In communities like this, homeowner participation is already fragile. Attendance is never guaranteed, and apathy is always lurking in the background. If meetings become known for inefficiency, fewer people will show up, which means fewer voices in the decision-making process. And when fewer people participate, decisions start to feel less legitimate. Suddenly, you've got neighbors accusing the board of being out of touch or not representative. And it didn't stop there. Another concern was compliance and legality. HOA boards have to follow strict rules. Open meeting laws in some states require transparency. Votes can be challenged if someone believes the process wasn't handled properly. And verification is part of that legal backbone, ensuring that only true members are participating. If the system failed, even unintentionally, the entire meeting could be questioned later. Imagine the headache of redoing an election or defending decisions in court, just because the verification process wasn't airtight. This was the nightmare scenario the board wanted to avoid. On top of that, there was the human side of things. The board members themselves felt embarrassed. Nobody enjoys starting a meeting with 50 annoyed faces staring at them from a Zoom grid. Nobody likes being the one fumbling with spreadsheets or address lists while everyone else waits. The volunteers had taken on leadership roles, but the verification delays made them look disorganized. And perception, once again, was everything. So, during their post-meeting debrief, the board laid everything out on the table. They agreed on a few things right away. This can't happen again. The delays had to be fixed before the next annual meeting. Verification was non-negotiable. They couldn't simply skip the process, because that would undermine both the legality and fairness of the meeting. They needed a better system, something streamlined, faster, and less frustrating for everyone involved. But here's where things got complicated. The management company preferred Zoom. They already had licenses. They were comfortable using it, and it was the simplest option for them to manage. Switching platforms would mean extra work, new costs, and possibly resistance from the management team. Meanwhile, some board members suggested pre-registration. Have everyone sign up in advance, confirm their address, and then simply log in, verified on the day of the meeting. On paper, this sounded promising, but others pushed back. What if people forgot to register? Would they be locked out of the meeting? Would that violate open meeting laws? It was a risky solution, and the last thing they wanted was to accidentally exclude legitimate homeowners. The tension in these discussions reflected a bigger issue. The board was trying to balance two competing priorities, efficiency and fairness. Efficiency demanded speed. Homeowners wanted to log in and get started right away, but fairness demanded caution. Every member had a right to participate, and cutting corners on verification could compromise the integrity of the process. The board also worried about optics. If they rolled out a new system that confused people, they could end up with even more frustration. If they asked members to pre-register and someone missed the deadline, they'd be accused of gatekeeping. If they stuck with Zoom, they'd face the same 20-minute bottleneck. It felt like a lose-lose situation. And that's when one board member asked the question that summed up the challenge perfectly. How do we make this process feel invisible? In other words, how do you keep the security and the checks in place, but make it so seamless that members barely notice it's happening? Because if the process is invisible, there's no frustration. People log in, they're welcomed, and the meeting begins on time. That was the dream. The concern wasn't just about this year's meeting, it was about the future of the community. The board understood that if they didn't fix this, the annual meeting would continue to start on the wrong foot year after year. And every year, they'd lose a little more trust, a little more participation, and a little more credibility. They couldn't let that happen. So, with the pressure mounting and the clock ticking toward the next annual meeting, the board began laying out their concerns. The board knew they couldn't just complain about the problem. They had to act. The next annual meeting was coming fast, and they needed to figure out a smoother, more professional way of handling verification. So, they rolled up their sleeves and began exploring solutions. The first idea on the table was the most obvious. Stick with Zoom, but improve the process. The management company was already comfortable with Zoom, so maybe the answer wasn't to ditch the platform entirely, but to get smarter about how it was used. Could they assign multiple co-hosts to help with verification? Could they split the workload, with each board member verifying a handful of participants? Maybe if they had a master list of homeowners printed and ready, the process could go faster. But almost immediately, doubts crept in. Even if they streamlined verification, they'd still be relying on a manual process. People would still need to announce their names and addresses, someone would still need to cross-check the list, and with dozens of members joining at once, it would still be clunky. Sure, maybe it would shave a few minutes off, but would it really fix the root of the problem? Probably not. The second idea was pre-registration. This one sparked a lot of debate. On the surface, it sounded like the most efficient solution. Homeowners could register online in advance, submit their address, and be verified days before the meeting. Then, when the meeting day arrived, everyone could simply log in and jump straight into business. Smooth, fast, and professional. But as soon as the idea was proposed, concerns were raised. What if someone forgot to register? Would they be locked out? What if a homeowner's spouse or co-owner wanted to attend but didn't know they needed to register? What about the state's open meeting laws? Could requiring registration be interpreted as creating barriers to participation? The last thing the board wanted was to end up in legal trouble because someone claimed they were unfairly excluded. Then came the third option: specialized HOA meeting platforms. A few board members had heard of software designed specifically for homeowner associations, platforms that promised built-in verification, voting tools, and compliance with HOA laws. Companies like these pitched themselves as Zoom, but for HOS, it sounded almost too good to be true. The idea was exciting, but it also raised new challenges. These platforms often came with subscription fees, and budgets were tight. Would the community approve spending extra money just to make meetings run smoother? Some homeowners would argue yes, their time was valuable, but others might see it as unnecessary spending, especially if they already felt dues were too high. Another factor was training. A new platform would mean board members, management staff, and homeowners all had to learn a different system. Zoom might not be perfect, but at least everyone knew how it worked. Switching platforms could lead to confusion, login issues, or worse, fewer people showing up because they didn't want to deal with something new. As the board debated these options, the clock kept ticking. Each solution had its strengths, but also its drawbacks. It became clear that there wasn't going to be a perfect answer. One board member suggested thinking outside the box. Hybrid verification. Maybe the board could ask members to submit their addresses in advance, but not make it mandatory. Those who pre-verified could breeze through check-in, while others could still be verified manually on the spot. That way, most of the heavy lifting would be done ahead of time, but nobody would be excluded. It wouldn't eliminate the delay completely, but it might reduce it significantly. The idea gained some traction. But once again, concerns about fairness and logistics slowed things down. Would people actually bother to pre-verify, or would everyone just skip it, leaving the board stuck with the same mess? At this point, the board realized something important. The problem wasn't just technical, it was cultural. They weren't just fighting against bad software. They were fighting against habits, expectations, and the messy realities of human behavior. Still, they couldn't give up. Every meeting ended with the same conclusion. They needed a system that could check 3 critical boxes. Fair, fast. Nobody wanted another 20-minute delay. Fair. Every member had to feel welcome and included, even if they weren't tech-savvy. Compliant. Whatever system they chose had to stand up legally if it was ever challenged. The board members agreed that they would consult their legal counsel before making a final decision, just to be safe. Open meeting laws varied from state to state, and they couldn't afford to accidentally violate them. As the discussion wrapped up, the atmosphere was a mix of frustration and determination. They didn't have the perfect solution yet, but they knew they couldn't stay stuck in the old way of doing things. Something had to change, and that's where the story stands. A board caught between technology, legality, and community expectations, desperately searching for the balance that would allow their annual meeting to run the way it was supposed to. Because at the end of the day, this isn't really about software or Zoom links. It's about respect. Respect for the homeowner's time, respect for the community's rules, and respect for the process of running a neighborhood fairly. The cons. After countless discussions, brainstorming sessions, and debates, the board found themselves at a crossroads. They had identified the problem. They had analyzed the risks. They had explored possible solutions. But as of now, there was no magic button to fix everything at once. That's the reality of running a community. Sometimes, the challenges don't come from giant disasters or massive conflicts. Sometimes, it's the small, technical things, like a clunky Zoom verification process that slowly erode trust, participation, and goodwill. The board understood this. They weren't just trying to save 20 minutes of wasted time. They were trying to preserve something much bigger, the sense of community. Because when neighbors come together for a meeting, it isn't just about rules and budgets. It's about connection, it's about showing up, being heard, and feeling like the place you call home is managed fairly and respectfully. And when the process breaks down, even a little, it sends ripples through the whole system. People leave meetings frustrated instead of feeling engaged. They start to see the board not as volunteers doing their best, but as an obstacle. They begin questioning whether participation is even worth it. And once participation starts dropping, the whole structure of an HOA becomes shaky. That's why this issue mattered so much. It wasn't just about fixing Zoom, it was about proving that the board cared, that they respected their neighbors' time and voices enough to do better. So, the search for a solution continues. The board committed to reaching out to their legal counsel before making any changes. They knew they had to tread carefully, because compliance wasn't optional. Open meeting laws, voting requirements, homeowner rights, all of these added layers of complexity that couldn't be ignored. But even with those challenges, one thing was clear: the old way could not continue. The real question now was, what next? Would they stay with Zoom but create a stricter, more organized system of co-hosts and verification teams? Would they take the leap into a dedicated HOA platform, even if it meant convincing skeptical homeowners to spend more money? Or would they roll out a hybrid model, allowing pre-verification for those who wanted convenience while still offering same-day check-in for others? No matter what they chose, someone would be unhappy. That's the reality of community governance. But the board wasn't looking for perfection. They were looking for progress. And here's where the story takes a turn outward to you, the listener. Because the truth is, this isn't just one HOA's problem. Across the country, neighborhood associations, community groups, and even small organizations are struggling with the exact same challenge. How do you run virtual meetings in a way that's secure, fair, and efficient? Technology has made it easier than ever to connect people across distances, but it's also exposed the cracks in systems that were never designed for this new digital-first world. So, let's put the question to you. If you were in this board's shoes, what would you do? Would you stick with what you know and try to squeeze efficiency out of Zoom? Would you invest in specialized software, even if it cost more money and time up front? Or would you take a risk, experiment with a hybrid or pre-registration model, and hope it worked without excluding anyone? There isn't a single right answer. Each path has trade-offs. Each path carries risks. But what matters most is the willingness to confront the problem head-on instead of letting it repeat year after year, because here's the bottom line: a community that values its members' time is a community that earns their trust. And trust is the most valuable currency an HOA or any group can have. The story of this board is still unfolding. Their next annual meeting will be the true test. Will they find a system that finally runs smoothly, or will they once again face 20 minutes of frustration before the real work can even begin? For now, we leave that question open. But one thing is certain: whether you live in a 300-home neighborhood, a high-rise condo, or even a small apartment building, the lesson is the same. Community doesn't run on software alone. It runs on respect, efficiency, and trust. Fair. Every